Julie, thank you so much for joining us in this latest edition of the Fulcrum Roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
The article that we published in March called Speak Now or Forever War, where you wrote about the Trump administration's attempt to limit dissent within the military. The article describes how economic pressures and the structure of military benefits can discourage young service members from speaking out or refusing unlawful orders. Tell us a little bit more about your article.
Well, thanks for all of that. And yeah, so when I wrote that, I began writing that piece before we entered the war. So it's worth noting that there were already signs that dissent was maybe being stifled or that people were going to be struggling to speak out. And that was in anticipation. And then between, I think, me submitting it and it publishing, we had to do some edits quickly because suddenly we had engaged in a conflict. But I think the writing has been on the walls in terms of changes that this administration has been making, but also there are pieces to the military that make speaking out always difficult. So when you join the military, you swear an oath to the Constitution. That's very important. We take great pride in that. But when you're doing it, you're also signing away some of the rights that you would otherwise have. You don't have the same freedom of speech rights automatically. And that's true for most federal positions because of the Hatch Act. There are particular rules in place that try to limit your speech, but because of the conflict of interest it could have or something like that. So it makes sense that we don't necessarily want if we have a nonpartisan body, a military, that we don't want soldiers saying things that are too political while they're wearing the uniform, because that could disrupt unit cohesion. It could create confusion within the military. It could create confusion publicly about that the military has a stance when it's not. Normally, there's been great efforts to make sure that the military is nonpartisan with its loyalty specifically just to the Constitution. So that is by design, and there's a reason why I've been publishing lots of op-eds about the military since I got out of the military. But while I was in, I was very careful if I was ever writing that what I was saying was neutral and without any political persuasion, or just for speaking about improvement of the military, but not with any partisan leanings. And so I think that's important. If we want a nonpartisan military, that is part of it. The issue, or one huge red flag that I saw, was that as we were seeing more and more, seeing the military being used more and more in untraditional ways, like deploying the Marines to Los Angeles, or the strikes that we were seeing in the fall in the Caribbean, that different protocols were changing, and it was somewhat questionable what we were engaging in and where this conflict was coming from, even before Iran. That inspired some lawmakers who are also veterans to make a video where they basically just restated what the military rules are on speech. Sorry, they didn't say what is on speech, but they were just reminding service members of what the rules are in terms of because of the oath that you take to the Constitution, that you have it is your duty to disobey an unlawful order. That if you are given an order that's unconstitutional or that you believe to be illegal, that the rules are stated as that you must, in fact, disobey that order. That is what the rule is. These veterans, who are also lawmakers, restated that. And the aftermath of them just restating the law resulted in the sitting president of the United States, doing a rampage of tweets where he threatened these lawmakers with hangings, and called it treacherous sedition, acts of sedition, and that to remind service members of the oath that they've made, that this is an act of sedition, that this is treason. Which it's not. It should. If we have reached a point where restating the Constitution or laws, we're just repeating them, if that is sedition, we've completely lost ourselves. Like, what are we talking about? So that is plainly false, and it's important that's false. But it's important to note that it's false. But this symbolism of that was that these veterans' speech was then threatened. So they are on the outside. They're in a position now where they are allowed to write partisan op-eds. They are partisan politicians. They've run, they belong to parties, but they were speaking as veterans. But none of that should matter. They have freedom of speech now, and their freedom of speech should not be limited because of their veteran status. If anything, their veteran status should probably amplify their voices, and we should be looking to them particularly for advice when we consider military matters. That this is an area that they are subject matter experts in. So to not only disregard the weight of what this message is, but rather to call it seditious treason is very problematic, because for the service members who are still actively serving, who already voluntarily give up much of their freedom of speech by virtue of taking the sacred oath, to see that even on the other side, that even if once they get out of the military, that to speak just the law of the land could be considered seditious treason, punishable by hanging, is a very powerful message, and one that is naturally, I think, very silencing. And that is not to even bring in all of the other reasons why sailors and soldiers might be reluctant to speak out or ruffle feathers or rock the boat in any way, which is, as you pointed out, is the financial reasons that often people do join the military. And I say, for better or for worse, the military is one of the best places in this country to get healthcare, education, and just a stable paycheck. There are a lot of people are incentivized to join the military for the benefits, which is probably by design. We want people to join the military, but these, especially when we're in a moment of a depressed economy, the military continues to be this stable option, this foot in the door to a better life for a lot of people. And if they've got some patriotism, they want to do this job, this is a great way to find economic, social mobility, and upward mobility. But once you're there, if you are fearful that you could be easily purged for even the least bit of difference in your, like if you could be hanged for even just simply stating the law, then it has a chilling effect on the speech of veterans and certainly of service members.
Now, one of the biggest critics that from the Trump administration in regards to exercising that freedom of speech is Secretary Pete Hegseth, which you've also written extensively about. He's been very defensive with media and the coverage of any military operation, most recently in Iran. Understanding, and I'm also very critical of the media also, but from your perspective as a contributor with the Fulcrum, and but also a veteran, is Secretary Hegseth right or partially right?
Well, it's no, he's not right. I think it's great to be critical of the media. I think it's great to be critical in general of the things we care about most, because if we care about them the most, then it's constructive. As in, I think a form of patriotism is to be critical of this country. When I'm writing pieces about the military and I'm pointing out things that feel like inherent flaws, it's not because I want to put down the military and just be mean or antagonize the military. It's because I was a part of it. I still feel a sense of belonging to it. I have pride in it. I'm also care about the people who are there, and so I want to critique it to improve it. But the way that Secretary Hegseth is talking about the media is not with a concern for improvement. It is fully with an agenda to delegitimize them and to delegitimize and discredit their work, but also to exclude them from the process. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that between Secretary Hegseth and Trump, there's been an active effort to push the media out in order to reduce transparency and accountability of what the military is doing. And it seems like whenever we discover things that they wouldn't want us to discover, rather than take accountability and answer questions and show us the process and let us in, both the American public but also Congress, rather than do that, instead they want to turn it around, be critical as a form of silencing or deflecting, and then never actually follow up and give the information. So if the military was an organization where we could see everything that was going on easily, maybe we could think differently about what the media's relationship is with the military. But this is an organization that the entire way that it's structured includes secret clearances and top secret clearances, and as a matter of national security, a lot is confidential or for official use only, and so we rely on the press to have enough access to be able to report on what's going on. I think it's especially important given that we're spending billions of dollars on this war. The American taxpayers deserve to know what that money is going towards. I mean, there's so many reasons why a free, open press is a crucial thing to democracy and the life as we know it. And so I would consider Hegseth's argument if he had literally anything else to say for it and wasn't also actively seeming to want to mislead or lie altogether or conceal things from the media. And so examples, though, already is there's been evidence to suggest that they've tried to downplay casualties. Something just came out that what Secretary Hegseth called a squirter when a missile came and hit a compound. I think it was in Kuwait. Kill one of the survivors of that had to go on record. He's a soldier, and he said, "I'm not even trying to be political, but I do need to point out that what was attacked was not reinforced at all. It wasn't a squirter. We were in a compound that was not remotely prepared to defend itself." And so when we have proof that the Secretary of War is lying about it, or in any number of ways being dishonest about the reality of the conflicts that we're in, there is no excuse to be also simultaneously attacking the media for their negative portrayal. They're trying to say it's not patriotic to report the news. I think by that logic, then I think it would follow, well, it's not patriotic then to send Americans in somewhere that you can't defend or have anything to say about to the military. Like, these arguments are ridiculous to be qualifying the patriotism here. The press are doing their jobs to try to have transparency to the American public, while the Pentagon seems to be, at least Secretary of Hegseth seems to be deliberately trying to not let us know exactly what's going on. And I also think we saw that with the strikes in the Caribbean, that they were very reluctant to release video footage of it. There's been moments along the way where protocol is not being followed, and the press and the American public are not included at all on what's actually going on. So happy to zoom in more there. I also just, one thing that you said at the beginning too, is you were talking about the different places that the troops were being deployed, and something you said made me think of just the fact that when we talk about disobeying these illegal orders, that I am coming to speak to you. I got out as a lieutenant commander. I was an officer for 10 years. I also, while I was active duty, I got a law degree. I've taken constitutional law. I got a law degree after that too. I'm probably among the top veterans who has a sense of constitutional law and what the Constitution really says and what that means. And still, it's very difficult to know where the line is in any given situation. It takes thought. And so I just wanted to also circle back to emphasize that for these 18-year-olds who are joining, 18 to 25, the young enlisted recruits, young officers too, putting them in any situation where there's a legal gray area is really it is it almost an impossible burden to put on folks in that position, that they when did they learn constitutional law. And so we need our leaders, we need the Secretary of War, we need the admirals and the generals to have these things front of mind, because they have the experience and should have the study to make these determinations. But it's an incredible burden to be putting on these young folks. So all the more disappointing when you see active evidence of the person in charge lying to the press about what's going on.
It's one thing, right? I mean, and I know, right, they're swearing to defend the Constitution and enemies, domestic and foreign, but it is unusual to see armed servicemen and women in our cities, it almost is an intimidation factor, but it does create, in certain circumstances, a negative narrative between service people and and uh, and the citizens that they're sworn to protect. Can you share a little bit about that dynamic that some service people might be feeling because they're being deployed in American cities? Something that, again, not unprecedented, but certainly in the way that we've seen in the first 2 years of the Trump administration's return to the White House.
Yes, great question. And there's a lot of pieces here. So one is I think it's bad for the military overall and bad for national security just because of the perception that the public has because of this. Like, I think it is incredibly disorienting and just it's disconcerting to see someone in uniform ever around when you're just going about your day-to-day life. If I'm going through the New York subway, the difference between seeing a cop and seeing someone in an army uniform, you feel that difference, and though both can make people feel uncomfortable, I think the presence of military officers and enlisted soldiers, it just does change the feeling that you have and your level of it's easy to wonder, should I feel safe? Do I feel safer because there's a presence of a military personnel here, or do I actually feel less safe because what are they doing here? Am I not safe? Is that why they're here? And so that creates confusion and all of these things. But certainly, if the American people feel that the military is being used as a political arm, which a lot of sentiment shares, that absolutely delegitimizes trust in the military. Because if you stop thinking of the military as this, nonpartisan, not apolitical defense of the neutral constitution that you believe in, then that is kind of shattered once they seem to be there, their express purpose for being there, if it feels political. And so that's one thing that's bad. And I think there's a lot of polls. The Reagan Institute does a poll, but confidence and overall trust in the military is so low right now. And continuing to sink. But we've seen historic trends of reduced confidence and trust in the military, and so that's a problem because that in a recruiting shortage that is basically only being saved right now because the economy overall is so bad that people are still joining the military for the financial security, I think. But when you've had a trend of really bad recruitment, when there's low confidence in trust, when we're in a war and all these things are going on, it is likely that there's going to be fewer people who want to join that organization that seems now political and less trustworthy and all these things. And so what we're looking at already is a national security problem down the line of military manpower and readiness, because if recruitment goes down, that's a problem. But in terms of the experience of the service member, that's a problem for retention, and it's a problem for what's going on while they stay there. First of all, just any mission that you have, once people become disenchanted with the mission or with the team or with the leadership, they're less connected to that mission. They're not going to work as hard. They're not going to be as inspiring leaders or this or that. So there's like the soft effect there. But I imagine that in my experience as an officer, is when morale is low, we don't get as much done. But once we're if we can be working together as a team and getting job satisfaction, now there's more enthusiasm coming into work, and we're able to get a lot more done, and we're meeting all of our metrics and things like that. So that's just work culture. But I do think that we risk seeing massive effects on retention. There are so many different things going on in the military that I think would cause people to leave in a way that is unprecedented. But now, even if you didn't join for financial reasons and you joined because you wanted to, fight bad guys abroad, which is not what I was thinking when I joined, but I know that those folks do. And that if you came to fight bad guys abroad and as a concept, and you get sent to Los Angeles, I think your illusion of the military has shattered too. So in a similar way to what the American public is experiencing, when there are tax dollars that fund a huge budget, a defense budget, if that's deploying them to their city, I think also imagine how the kid who left home, he wanted to join the Navy, see the world, and and he becomes a Marine and he goes to Los Angeles. Like, I think that has got to be disappointing for a lot of folks who didn't expect to be deployed to their neighborhoods or the neighborhoods of people that they relate to and are Americans. Um, so that is one piece. I also think, yeah, this is unprecedented, and like the military deployment, absolutely. National Guard is a sort of a different entity. But there's the historic civil rights moment where the National Guard was sent to Alabama to help with civil rights and basically, help with the desegregation of schools, and go up against the governor, George Wallace, at that time. Hugely important historic moment where the National Guard came in. Perhaps people today would argue that that was a political arm that they were doing, but also civil rights at that time, that was the law. What they were going to enforce, what was federal law. I don't think it's as there's to me, everything we've heard of why they're being sent feels tenuous at best in terms of an actual legal justification for it. And there's enough evidence to suggest what once would have sounded really sinister and cynical, but now seems very plausible, which is, as you mentioned, intimidation. When there is talk of deploying these when there is fabricated sensationalization of the idea of voter fraud, and we are being normalized to the idea and desensitized to the idea of potentially sending National Guard in to monitor elections, that's voter intimidation. And so I think, I don't want to create like straight rules about any of these things. There might be times when, in an apolitical, nonpartisan way, sending the National Guard to a state makes sense. We've done it for disaster relief, things like this. But when they're trying to purge voter rolls and are preemptively creating a narrative of voter fraud that statistically does not exist nearly at, not even close, not even then it's hard to convince yourself of a different narrative.
Julie Roland, veteran, collaborator with the Fulcrum, thank you very much for your service, and thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for your time and your questions. Thank you, Hugo.